The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There will be 6 Democratic primary debates during the 2016 Democratic primary. We know where 4 of them are going to be. It's going to be Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. 2 of the locations still have not been determined. We have a quote from DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz about this. She said, quote, "Our debate schedule will not only give Democratic voters multiple opportunities to size up the candidates for the nomination side by side, but will give all Americans a chance to see a unified Democratic vision of economic opportunity and progress, no matter whom our nominee may be." Hillary Clinton tweeting, quote, "While GOP debates the same failed policy, Democrats will debate how to help families get ahead. Looking forward to a real conversation." On the Republican side, they're expected to have somewhere between 9 and 12 primary debates. They may have a dozen or more candidates, Lewis, and it is going to be very tough to stand out unless you do something so insane that it can't, that there's no choice but for it to be the focus of the debates. It could be pretty tough to stand out amongst a dozen Republicans.
Agreed. But I think in certain cases, I think when people are watching these debates, Hillary Clinton kind of stands out regardless of what she says or does, just because she is that famous and prominent and because of her name and status.
And we're going to talk about that in terms of how the Democratic primary is being reported. But you're saying specifically, even just on a stage, even if that stage were to be more crowded, that for Hillary Clinton, that she would stand out anyway.
For many people watching these debates, they might not recognize half the people on that stage, but they'll recognize Hillary Clinton.
It will be interesting to see in these debates where Hillary Clinton positions herself in relation to Bernie Sanders. One strategy would be to sort of play up her populist side. We said, hey, Bernie Sanders, a real progressive, he's going to go up on the stage and he is going to make his populist progressive views known. And we know from polling that the American public, for the most part, agrees with a lot of Bernie Sanders' positions once they're asked about them in a non-hyper-politicized way. Hillary Clinton could go up there and use language that makes it sound as though she basically agrees with what Bernie Sanders is saying, but she would be a better person to implement those policies. That's one idea. On the other hand, Hillary Clinton could go up there and say, I need to actually distinguish myself from Bernie Sanders. I'm going to draw the distinctions between Bernie Sanders and my more moderate positions. I think ultimately it will probably depend on what her campaign thinks is going to poll better, making herself seem as if she's also a populist, but more experienced than Bernie Sanders, or saying, no, this guy is too far left. I'm a moderate Democrat, and I am who you should be voting for.
I think on many social issues, she probably will sound exactly the same as Bernie Sanders, and that might not be good for either one of them. But I think you can expect her to sound a bit more like a Republican when it comes to issues of national security and things like that.
Will the progressive criticisms of Hillary Clinton be done in a way that would still position her to be reasonably supported by progressives in the national election? Let me ask it in a different way. If Hillary Clinton gets really hammered by the actual left during the debates, and she ultimately becomes the nominee, we don't know who will be the nominee. It could be Hillary Clinton. If that happens, will the attacks during the primary be so strong that progressives would have very little credibility by eventually supporting Hillary Clinton in the national election? You could make the argument that, yes, how could someone who hammers Hillary Clinton for not being progressive during the primaries then support her in the national election? Or you could say, well, you're ultimately just going to vote for the candidate who is closest to your point of view. And as moderate as Hillary Clinton may be, she's still going to be closer to a progressive's point of view than someone like Ted Cruz.
I think that is the case. And I think many Americans don't like who they're voting for either way, but they need to pick someone.
The New York Times is already ignoring Bernie Sanders. We talked about the likely issue of corporate media not taking Bernie Sanders as seriously as a Democratic presidential candidate. And I found this piece that the New York Times did on May 5th. Remember that Bernie Sanders announced his candidacy on April 30th. A May 5th piece on American views on issues and on the candidates for 2016. The New York Times, right? Great. Let's see what people are thinking. I pull it up. There's a section on issues. Fantastic. What do people think about Obamacare? What do people think about immigration and same-sex marriage and the ability of businesses to refuse service to gay people, etc.? Very well done. We're talking about issues. Then there's a section on Republican candidates. Very good. Would you consider voting for Jeb Bush, for example? What about Ben Carson, Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, Huckabee, Bobby Jindal, Rand Paul, Rick Perry? And you'll notice a lot of these names are Republicans who are not even declared candidates yet. Very thorough, right, Lewis? Very, very good. Let's get on to the section about the Democratic candidates. Oh, wait a second. There is no such section in the New York Times piece. They just have a section called Hillary Rodham Clinton with 3 opinion questions about Hillary Rodham Clinton. A section about Republicans with people who haven't even declared their candidacy, and then nothing about Bernie Sanders. I thought, well, it's based on poll data from earlier than May 5th. So maybe they conducted the poll before Bernie was running. No, the poll data is from April 30th to May 3rd. Bernie declared his candidacy on April 30th. And what's more interesting is I actually went and looked at the poll. You could look at the source poll data for the New York Times expose on the 2016 election, and the full poll actually does ask voters about Bernie Sanders. It was a conscious decision by the New York Times just not to mention the guy.
It's, say what you want about the New York Times. It is a business, right? And so maybe this is a business decision.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, the New York Times is considered super liberal by the right. It's just this left-wing rag, blah, blah, blah. We're mostly dealing with corporate media. Right now, there is no real incentive for corporate media to give any attention or more than attention than the minimum that is just what will avoid obvious criticism of you as a complete shill to Bernie Sanders. Why would you do it? And that's exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's sad, but that's, I think, what's happening here. And maybe if we were in the positions to make those decisions at the New York Times, maybe we'd be saying the same thing because I'm not sure how they're doing financially.
Republicans claim that they want to reduce STDs. Republicans claim that they want to reduce teen pregnancy. Republicans claim that they don't want abortions. But they also, as I've told you many times, oppose reasonable birth control and sex education policy. And this is continuing. Republicans in the Colorado Senate have now killed an effort to set aside some funding for a birth control program that provides IUDs to low-income women. Listen to the data around this initiative. The Colorado Family Planning Initiative has contributed to a 40% drop in teen births over the last 5 years. The program was previously funded by a private donor, an anonymous private donor. The bipartisan House proposal says, okay, that private money is now ending. We need $5 million in funding to give the IUDs to teenage girls. And Congresswoman Lori Sain opposed the bill, saying the program encourages sex. Quote, so in this scenario, the government is subsidizing sex because a woman typically doesn't get birth control to hold hands and watch reruns of Gilligan's Island. Let's ignore how insane her framing of the issue is. This is a program that has reduced pregnancies among this group by 40%. That reduces abortion. Republicans claim that they want to reduce abortion, and then they kill the program. It's also, by the way, a fiscally conservative program. The program saved the state about $6 in future Medicaid costs for every dollar invested. Think about it. It's just obvious. You have a group of women, young women, low-income women. If they get pregnant, think about when they go on Medicaid, how much that's going to cost. You can save on a $1 to $6 ratio, spend $1 to save $6 with this program and reduce the number of abortions, which you claim to want to do. Why wouldn't Republicans be cheering, Lewis, about this program? Fiscally conservative and reduces abortion? They don't want it.
No, because they don't want people having sex, and they don't want the government involved in anything that has anything to do with sex.
Unless it's legislating that people should not be having gay sex.
That is true. I think it's clear that someone's really out of touch when they claim that people in 2015 might be watching Gilligan's Island. But isn't Colorado such an interesting place where you have such incredibly progressive things happening, and then simultaneously this? And
you have Republicans who don't understand one iota about fiscal responsibility. You have this grotesque incongruency between claiming to want to prevent pregnancy and abortion and doing exactly the opposite through the policies that you legislate. It's disgusting. If one person in our audience can explain to me the logic of this in a way that is not just this sort of half-baked, dim-witted, right-wing non-logic, please send me a tweet at twitter.com/dpacman. We'll take a break. What a program today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today's David Pakman Show member of the day is Mark Betters, and there could not be a better day, sorry for the pun, to be member of the day, because remember that announcement we made last week about how the show is going to be moving to Boston and expanding and starting an investigative journalism component? When that happened, as I mentioned, we got emails from a lot of people who want to be investors in the show and who wanted to send in some early contributions. But 4 different people also got in touch wanting to subsidize some memberships for new members. Chris Utzig reached out to me and subsidized 6 memberships. Larry and Juliet got in touch, as well as an anonymous member who has subsidized memberships in the past. And altogether, we have 35 memberships available at half price. So normally a yearly membership is $60. Because of Chris and Larry and Juliet and the 4th member, we can offer 35 of these memberships at half price to you at only $30. And the best part is you can lock that price in for as long as you want. After the Boston move, after programming expands, after there's more shows, you will keep that same $30 a year rate for as long as you want. If you want one of these 35 half-price memberships, at this point we have, I think, 28 left because we sent out an email blast about it last night. Email us. Go to our website, davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us, and just say, hey, David, I'd love one of those half-price memberships. We will send you a link with a password to sign up. Lewis, usually my film and book recommendations are not new films or new books, although I did do a couple new books over the last year. Rarely new films, but I went to the movies. Sometimes I go to the movies, Lewis. It is pretty rare. And I saw a movie that I really want to recommend to the audience. It is Ex Machina. It is about a young programmer who is selected to participate in a breakthrough relating to artificial intelligence, and he's sent to evaluate the qualities of an AI. It is really, really good. I saw it here in New York City over the weekend, and it was one of those movies where, as I watched it, I was very entertained. But as I was leaving, I was wondering, was that entertaining? Was it good? I'm confused about this. I'm confused about that. And as the days have passed, now I have realized that it really is a great film, and I would recommend people see it. I know you're thinking of going soon, right?
I've heard only great things. I have some friends here that saw it. They loved it. And yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I've got to get out and do that.
And Oscar Isaac is very good in the film. So is Alicia Vikander. And it's a good cast, the story is interesting, and it relates to a lot of the things we've been talking about on the show, technological development and artificial intelligence and so many other things. Ex Machina, I recommend it. If you've seen it, send me your thoughts on it. If you didn't like it, I actually would be very interested in hearing from people about what about the film you did not like. The New York City Police Department is investigating allegations that men at a Dallas barbecue restaurant here in Manhattan were called anti-gay slurs and then beaten. Jonathan Snipes, who's 32 years old, told DNA Info that he was having dinner at the Chelsea neighborhood restaurant, Dallas Barbecue. Dallas Barbecue is actually a New York chain. They have one location in Chelsea, with his 25-year-old boyfriend, Ethan York Adams, on Tuesday night when the attack occurred. He said, a table near us audibly started making pretty gross comments about the two of us, like white fags spilling drinks. He got up saying, "I don't let anyone talk to me that way." So I said, "What did you say about us?" Snipes says that he weighs about 140 pounds. He did not expect two large men to engage him in a very agitated verbal disagreement and then a physical confrontation. According to DNA info, the man knocked Snipes off of his feet and then started kicking him. At a certain point, one of the men picked up a chair, and I will play the video for you. I will warn you, it is quite disturbing. This is cell phone video posted to Instagram by Issam Sharef is the username, ISAAMSHAREF. It shows a man, it's someone getting hit with a chair at what seems to be full force. Take a look at this. It is shocking, shocking video, Lewis. I mean, it's like WWE wrestling, except someone actually got hit and hurt with a chair. This was no act.
Yeah, pretty aggressive, pretty violent, and it doesn't seem like the other patrons are really doing much to. I mean, no one tried to stop that, right?
Yeah, you hear screaming. It looks like after the chair, you know, this has been escalating for several minutes already, and then you see the chair picked up, and this guy is hit with the chair. And you see a couple people stand up, but these guys have to be found and prosecuted to the fullest. Agree or disagree, by the way, with hate crime enhancements. They are part of the law, and this is a clear case for a hate crime enhancement. When you start yelling about white fags and immediately start beating them up, I think there's a very, very strong case to be made for that. What's also really disturbing to me is that the gay couple was eating at Dallas Barbecue, because I can assure you this is not the barbecue place to go to if you're here in New York City. I would much prefer the couple go to a different barbecue place, which maybe has fewer homophobic patrons as well.
It could. The most amazing thing about this is that people just let these guys leave. It really highlights that no one seemed to care.
Maybe the bigot who threw the chair felt persecuted by the horrendous gays forcing their existing in the world agenda on his soul. Maybe he was just acting courageously because the gay people were forcing their right to exist on others.
An interesting theory, and one that he would probably agree with.
We have some results from the Deflategate investigation from our New England Patriots involving Tom Brady. This goes back to that AFC Championship game against the Colts, Lewis, where the Patriots were accused of deliberately underinflating footballs because that's the preference of star quarterback Tom Brady. We said a lot of things about this. We talked about the science around it and whether it would be possible for the change in air temperature to lead to ball deflation. The investigation has been concluded, and the investigation says that more likely than not, New England Patriots quarterback Tom Brady was at least generally aware of the inappropriate activities by two Patriots employees that ended up with balls being underinflated. The report was released yesterday by attorney Ted Wells and said it is more probable than not that Jim McNally and John Yastrzemski participated in a deliberate plan to circumvent the rules by releasing air from Patriots game balls. Patriots owner Robert Kraft issued a response saying the organization is disappointed by the report, but that it lacks incontrovertible or hard evidence of deliberate deflation here. I read that there are reports from an unnamed league source that the league is considering up to a season suspension for Tom Brady, who the report claims knew about what was going on. Remember that Tom Brady on January 22nd said he had no idea what happened and would never do anything to break the rules. As Patriots fans, Lewis, what is our reaction? I know what mine is.
First of all, the language here is insane. more probable than not, or more likely than not, that Tom Brady was at least generally aware. This means that there is nothing conclusive. This is not definitive. It means that they still don't know, and so that they're considering punishing Tom Brady for something that they are not sure of.
Well, that's the argument
crazy.
that Tom Brady's agent, Don Yee, is saying, listen, first of all, there's a relationship here between the NFL and the law firm, Paul Weiss, Rick Find, Wharton, and Garrison, and that's a relationship that is concerning to us. And number two, aside from this not being an independent investigation, if you read this closely and critically as opposed to the headlines, there is nothing in there that actually says Tom Brady did anything deliberately wrong or even knew about the specifics of this. So listen, if Tom Brady lied and if Tom Brady did have a part in this or was more aware than as aware as the report seems to imply, then absolutely he should be condemned. And I don't care about the fact that I'm a Patriots fan. The right thing is that there should be punishment here. However, when I read the report, when it says that it is more likely than not that Tom Brady was at least generally aware, that might just mean Brady's generally aware that the team understands he prefers the balls less inflated than more. Does that mean outside of the allowed stipulated pressure? Maybe not. So I feel like the language, if you do read it critically, is very weak in its indictment of Tom Brady.
Yeah, this I think is a crusade against the Patriots for some reason. I don't know. I guess the most successful teams are just usually the most disliked in any sporting event or arena, what have you.
And you have to admit, though, that if this does lead to a suspension for Brady, that it would be devastating to the Patriots.
Of course. That goes without without a doubt. It would be terrible. And, he's probably nearing the end of his career, and this would be a huge blow for him.
And as of right now, though, Lewis, based on what we have heard said since January and the addition of this report now, are you ready to take a different stance on this?
No. Look, if he did do this, then, of course, I think there should be, we don't know that he did. If he did, let's just say they know he did.
Yeah.
Yes, there should be some type of punishment. But is a few changes in the PSI of a football going to mean that, that he was able to do what he did? No. Obviously, he is still one of the top 5 best quarterbacks of all time. And, he still won all those games.
There it is. Judge Lewis has ruled on this one. We will see what happens. I know that Lewis is going to get some hate for what he is saying, but we are both unquestionably sure that if there is actual proof, there should be punishment for Tom Brady. We agree there, Lewis, no question about it. After the break, Mark Potok from the Southern Poverty Law Center. What does the SPLC think about men's rights activism? That's next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program Mark Potok, Senior Fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center and Editor-in-Chief of their Intelligence Report. Mark, we've been talking a lot lately about men's rights activism and sort of concurrently, although they do distinguish themselves, the anti-feminist movement in the United States and Canada. And back in the spring of 2012, the intelligence report from the SPLC put out sort of a statement about some groups within the men's rights activism sphere that you guys are watching, but correct me if I'm wrong, you did not designate them as hate groups.
That's true. There was a lot of confusion at the time. Simply, we wrote an article that was very critical of many of the websites and the people behind them in the so-called manosphere, these men's rights organization. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day.
And so I'd love to find out what the kind of threshold is to make it into a hate group according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. But before we get to that sort of higher standard, first tell us a little bit about how would men's rights groups, broadly speaking, come to your attention? How does that happen?
Well, to be honest, I was fairly oblivious to this whole world until we got a tip about a couple of websites that we began to look at. And it very quickly became apparent that there was a whole world of these websites. As I say, the so-called manosphere. These were websites that purported to be a part of the men's rights or the father's rights movement, which has some legitimate beefs, I think. But when you went in and started to look at what was actually on the sites, it was just an incredible amount of misogyny, an incredible amount of defamation of women. One of the themes that runs through all of those websites, or certainly the vast majority of them, is the idea that women routinely lie about rape, that they claim they were raped in order to destroy men, to get advantages over men, and so on.
And when you look at these websites, what is the sort of standard that the SPLC has more broadly for determining what status might a particular website or movement have? What's the rubric, so to speak, that's used to ascertain that?
Well, we try very hard not to list simply websites as groups. For us to list an organization as a hate group, we need to have some kind of evidence that they're doing things beyond simply having a website in which somebody or a few people, whine and moan about this minority or that minority. So, for instance, Stormfront.org, which is the largest white supremacist forum in the world, it has almost 300,000 registered users, in addition to enormous numbers of visitors. We have never listed as a hate group because it really is a website, a web forum, and that's it.
And in the controversy that sort of started after that spring of 2012 intelligence report, where you listed a dozen or so of these websites, there was sort of a follow-up done in May of 2012, where the SPLC came out and said, okay, let's be clear, we didn't say that men's rights activists are inherently members of a hate movement. What our article sought to do was merely to point out some individual websites that we should be aware of that may contain hateful rhetoric or the like. Now, when you made that distinction, was that distinction made simply to clarify, or was it the result of a sort of blowback that SPLC received based on that initial intelligence report?
Oh, no. I mean, we didn't really have any significant blowback, and it wouldn't have concerned us in the least had we. I mean, there was blowback in the sense that, there was a lot of ranting and raving on some of the websites about us in general and about me in particular. But no, I mean, it was simply clarifying, look, and we were, I think, a little harder on the websites than the way you described it. It wasn't just these sort of bear watching. I mean, the websites are filled with incredible vitriol. Just to give an example to our listeners, Paul Elam, a guy who runs A Voice for Men and is considered in many ways the leader of this kind of anti-woman movement, for a long time had a website called registerher.com. And registerher.com was a file site which put up the pictures, sometimes personal information, names and so on, of course, of various enemies of the men's rights movement. Some of those people are feminists. Some of those people are women on the order of Lorena Bobbitt. Okay, I guess she wasn't very friendly to men. But an enormous number are simply women who in some way identify as feminist, in some way have offended the men in the men's rights movement. In other words, women who are guilty of no crime, and yet this website says these women should be prosecuted, they should be in jail, and so on. And, there's a huge amount of harassment, internet harassment of women who do come out in these ways, who do say something public about feminism or sexism or misogyny.
Has there been, or have you seen at the SPLC, any sort of correlation in the rise of the more extreme men's rights activist movements that seems to go along with the rise of some other movement that is also of concern to you? And I don't even want to give examples I don't want to be accused of linking any particular movements, but I guess the broad question is, what else have you seen a change in or rise in with regard to concerning movements that may correlate or in some way be connected to the rise in the men's rights activism movement?
I'm not sure we see a real correlation, for instance, to far-right Christian groups or anything like that. I would say that if there is a correlation to what's going on in the manosphere and the web world of these men's rights groups, it is to quote unquote mainstream politicians, generally in the Republican Party, right? The people who talk about legitimate rape as opposed to real rape, whatever that is. The Rush Limbaughs of the world who go after the Sandra Flukes for being sluts and whores and all the rest of it, and suggesting that Sandra Fluke should, post video of her having sex with her boyfriend if she's going to have health care pay for her contraception. So there's, I think it's fairly obvious that we've heard some fairly amazing things from politicians over the last several years, and in particular in the last midterm elections.
And that's interesting because anecdotally, whenever issues of feminism or gender or men's rights activism sort of come up on our program, we get anecdotally messages from so-called progressives who say that while they are progressive, they still sympathize or consider themselves to be men's rights activists on some level. If we look broadly, though, are you finding more of an association between the American right and men's rights activist groups?
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, let me say up front that I think there are absolutely some legitimate beefs that men have. There's no doubt that family courts for a very long time in this country have favored women in the sense that it's assumed that in a breakup, in a divorce, that the woman, the kind of homemaker, I guess, is going to wind up with the children or with primary custody of the children. Of course, that's changing over the years, but it is true that men have sometimes been treated very, very poorly in family courts. Now, that said, I would say that legitimate complaints are very much the minority of what you see on these websites. Most of it is just untrammeled hatred directed at women. And sometimes it gets into a world that is really unbelievable. I wrote a story very recently about a particular subreddit, one of these forums on the internet called Philosophy of Rape. This is run by a guy who is anonymous, of course. He's hiding behind the internet. His website is all about promoting the corrective, quote unquote, rape of sluts, harlots, harpies, and virtually every other woman in the world. He makes a bizarre exception for nuns. But this guy actually does give advice on how to rape. And he says the purpose of this website is how to rape women, improve society, and get away with it. And he actually does make certain suggestions. The one I remember particularly is a good day to carry out a rape is Thanksgiving, because the police will not be surprised by men running around in masks.
And Mark, has there been anything you've been able to identify? And if this is just your personal speculations or understandings, that's okay, as long as you tell us that this is just kind of what you're thinking. Is there anything going on societally over the last 10 years that you think is stimulating this type of activism? Or do you think that there's been more or less the same underlying level of these ideas in society, but the internet is sort of providing a forum for individuals to come together?
Well, this is only my opinion. I don't have any real data to back it up, but I'd say a couple of things. This obviously is related in some grand way to the changing roles of men and women in society. But of course, the feminist movement, it was 100 years ago, women got the right to vote. And the feminist movement was biggest, I think, in the 70s and 80s, and I suppose into the 90s. So in one way, we might think, well, this is all, we ought to be past all of this. But let me say, first of all, that the real violence directed against women began, in a sense, in 1989 at an engineering school in Montreal, where a particular guy, Marc Le Pen, murdered, if I remember, 16 women, lined them up in a classroom and murdered them because they were engineers. They were the first engineering class at that university that had accepted women. And Le Pen wrote explicitly about how feminists have destroyed my life and now I'm going to destroy their lives. Since then, we've seen a series of massacres, mass murders directed at women. The latest, of course, was last May in Santa Barbara, California, when a young guy named Elliot Rodger went on a rampage and murdered 6 people before killing himself. And this was all because, as he said, he was still a virgin at 22. He felt that beautiful blonde women owed him sex, and so on and so on and so on. He left a manifesto, kind of video manifesto. So what I'm saying is that, yes, there has been this underlying, really rage-filled reaction towards women for a good 30 years or so now. At the same time, you know, I do think it's come to the fore. I don't know if it's worse now, but it's come more to the fore because I think we're at a time of huge social change in many ways. The country is becoming rapidly less white. Things like same-sex marriage had advanced at really a kind of dizzying pace, I think, no matter where you are politically. I mean, you know, 10 years ago, attitudes about same-sex marriage were wildly different than they are today, when an easy majority of Americans think there's no problem with that. So I just think there are a lot of demographic and cultural and sociological changes happening, and there are people out there, you know, who are angry. This is not the country their forefathers built, the country they grew up in, and so on. And I think there's something to the point that you made, too, which is that obviously the internet makes it much easier to see these people. You might not know their actual names, but you just see all this rage out there. It's brought them together. And people like Paul Elam have created a more or less organized movement, if an internet-based movement. And so that has increasingly attracted people who might not have been posting or talking about this stuff openly.
We'll continue following it. We know the SPLC will. We've been speaking with Mark Potok, Senior Fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Mark, thank you as always for being on.
A real pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
True story, ISIS is getting into the hospitality industry. The Islamic State has refurbished and reopened the Nineveh International Hotel in Mosul, which is a northern Iraqi city that's under ISIS control, and it is very, very dangerous. It's a 262-bed, 5-star hotel. It was once voted the best place to stay in Iraq. It has had the old ISIS hospitality makeover. There's manicured gardens, freshly polished marble floors. It's going to be a little bit of a different scene, though. The dancing, the music, the smoking, and gambling are now forbidden. Women must be dressed from head to toe in black. And members of the group's Al-Khansa Brigade, which is its female police force, are tasked with patrolling the grounds of the Hotel Lewis to ensure everybody is obeying strict Sharia law. Well, what happens if you don't obey strict Sharia law at the hotel? Patrons risk amputation or beheading for failing to adhere to Islamic rules. I wonder if they do the amputations on site or have you brought elsewhere, like maybe a hospital or something?
That's a good question. Yeah, if they are amputating, do they make sure that you receive the proper medical attention afterwards, or are you just left on your own to deal with it?
If you go on TripAdvisor, where there are reviews for hotels, someone made, I'm guessing that this is like a joking comment, knowing about the ISIS renovation. They said, do you do a full English breakfast included in the stay? Which I assume the answer is no. And also, my wife would like to know if your policy allows topless sunbathing. I would also guess no on that one, Lewis.
Yeah, I think this is the start of something here. We're probably going to see hundreds of comments like this one flooding that page.
You can get a large hand-tossed halal pepperoni pizza. It's turkey pepperoni, so don't worry about that, from room service. Even in one of the most dangerous cities in the world, the room service pizza is still $28 plus a $6 delivery charge, 9% tax, and a mandatory 25% gratuity. Isn't that insane?
I would have just assumed that pizza is considered blasphemous in any way, shape, or form. I mean, you know, I guess I'm wrong. I guess there is, you know, some freedom left in Iraq.
In all seriousness, I don't know what the pizza cost there, but when I was just in Las Vegas for that conference I told you about, Aaron Wysocki from the Young Turks. It's like a urban legend now. One morning, he didn't realize there was an included breakfast at the conference, and he ordered an omelet from room service, and it was no exaggeration, close to $50. I think it was $23 for just an omelet. Each topping was like $3. There was a $6 room delivery charge, 9 or 8.75% or something, Nevada, Las Vegas tax, plus mandatory 20% or so gratuity. It was a $50 omelet.
Yeah, that's blasphemy right there. I mean, I think if anything deserves...
You're not a religious man, Lewis, but you know blasphemy when you hear it.
Yeah. If anything deserves a beheading or an amputation, it's a $50 omelet.
Very clever, Lewis. Very, very good. Hey, self-driving semi-trucks are going to be driving in Nevada on the highways. Daimler Truck North America has unveiled a self-driving semi-truck. The manufacturer said 2 of the vehicles are being taken for test drives on the highways in Nevada. It's one of only 4 states that allow autonomous or self-driving vehicles on the road. The trucks use radar sensors and cameras to monitor surrounding traffic and lane lines on the highways. They are driven by humans in city and suburban environments, but the truck can take over on the highway. The head of Daimler's commercial truck operations, Wolfgang Bernhard, says it's probably going to be a while before these are fully used for commercial purposes. They also said, we don't want to get rid of drivers. We want to make their lives more efficient and more easy. Okay, let's address a few things. Number one, for those who insist that autonomous vehicles are just never going to be a thing, look at just the last 6 months of development. How can we say that 10 years from now, this isn't going to be more and more of a real thing? Number two, we all know that eventually they will get rid of drivers, right? We have lots of truck drivers who listen to our show, and I know they listen as they're driving. This is not an attack on truck drivers. This is not an opinion of what should happen. But if we sit back and think for a second, do we really believe that as technology continues to advance, the status quo of truck drivers driving tractor trailers around the country by hand is going to remain the norm? Computers already calculate loads. They figure out and optimize which pallets and boxes and freight should go where. They calculate the best GPS routes, taking into consideration overpass heights for trucks and speed limits and commercial speed parkways that don't allow commercial vehicles. This is the natural progression. I think we are much better off, Lewis, rather than trying to hold back tech advancement to retain jobs, which has never worked historically, trying to figure out how can we reorganize society fundamentally so that all of these people whose jobs are being replaced by machines can really do something that improves society as a whole. It's almost too big of a conversation for people.
Yeah, I mean, apart from our opinion on what should happen, we do know what is going to happen. And in this particular case, of course, eventually this will all be autonomous because it just has to be.
And the idea that people need, quote, need a job as the starting point is actually what we need to rethink. We need to rethink, as automation really advances, why does everyone need what we today consider to be a so-called job? We have more than enough resources on this planet to make sure everyone is fully fed and clothed and taken care of. And machines are going to be replacing a lot of jobs. We should really be coming together and thinking about the next phase of the human race.
Yeah, that's talk about another conversation. I mean, we could do a whole show on that. But it is interesting to think about. And unfortunately, we are still very profit-driven.
All right, let's go to voicemails. 219-2DavidP is our voicemail number. Call anytime about anything you would like. Here's a question from someone. Let's take a listen.
Is this a comedy news show like Saturday Night Live or something like that? Because it just seems weird.
Yeah, I can only imagine, Lewis, what awaits us in Boston. That guy with a very, very distinct Boston accent. Yeah, this is a comedy show. It's just like Saturday Night Live, right, Lewis? I mean, I think that's the answer to his question.
Yeah, is this a sketch comedy show like Saturday Night Live? Pay closer attention, sir.
On the bonus show today, Denmark moves to eliminate cash, the A&E reality show about sex workers, and the connection between Floyd Mayweather and Burger King. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Remember that we need your support as we go through this great expansion and move to a bigger studio in Boston, Massachusetts. Sign up for membership and get access to the bonus show at davidpakman.com/membership. And we have 28 available half-price memberships subsidized by 4 members of the show. If you'd like one of those, email us through the Contact Us page at davidpakman.com. Talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.